So before we get started, because of the nature of the story, I don't know who's familiar with this story or not. I absolutely love this story. This is one of my favorite stories in 1 Samuel. I say that a lot, but that's just, I don't know. I love 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel is one of my favorite books in the Bible. And I love this particular chapter because it's so different than what we often think about. But there was also a couple things came up for me as I was studying this, and I got thinking about. Number one, the number one thing that I got thinking about, and this comes out of me, like when I'm getting into the scripture and stuff like that. Like, so I got my big like Greek Bible, and I'm looking through and looking at, or not Greek, but in this case Hebrew, because we're in 1 Samuel. So I'm looking at Hebrew and Hebrew words and stuff like that, and looking at translations and going through and doing word studies and stuff like this. And so sometimes I don't necessarily think about necessarily what is going on in the English, because I'm thinking about what this meant to their audience. And the reason I say that, and I think that it's important that I do that, but the reason that it's important that I think about it the other way as well is because you guys aren't Hebrew, right? You guys aren't Greek when we're in the New Testament. That's not you. And so I think about it, I'm like, man, I got to make sure that I'm being clear here. And one of the big ones that comes out of this is, because as I learned in my study, the Hebrews don't necessarily have a similar word. The best word that they have could be most closely translated to being like a subject of, but I was thinking of the word submission, right? And that's because the word submission actually comes up a lot in the New Testament, and it comes up a lot in the New Testament in the Greek by Paul specifically. But in the Hebrew, it's not unheard of. In fact, it's much like a lot of other English words in that the Hebrew decides we're going to use about 4 different words to describe this relationship, and in English we use one because, even though we have many, many more words, they include words like bootylicious, which are just absolute nonsense words, and so it doesn't matter that our lexicon is much thicker in English today. A lot of our words are nonsense, and it's like I brought this up with people the other day. We were talking about snow. And if you're Canadian, this is an easy one for you to understand. You hear the Inuits have 9 different words for snow. And you go, makes sense. If you're Canadian, you go, makes sense. Because snow is not snow is not snow. There are different kinds of snow. And if you've lived in Canada for any length of time, you know this. You're like, yeah, of course. But if you're in a different part of the world, a part where there is no snow, maybe like Florida, as I point out Lena here. If you grow up in a place where there is no snow, you hear snow and you just think, yeah, snow is snow is snow. I remember I kind of had a moment of this when I was out west in ministry for a while, and I got talking to guys that worked on oil rigs and stuff like that, and then I started to realize I'd never thought about it this way, but I heard steel, and I think steel is steel. And what I learned is steel is not steel. There are many different forms of steel, and different grades of steel, and qualities of steel, and all this different, and I was like, okay, steel is very complicated. Well, guess what? Submission is one of these words that is very complicated. And I think it's because we often detach it from another word that we don't even like to use in our culture today, another word that is absolutely imperative to this story, and it's honor. We don't like to talk about honor. In fact, oftentimes we'll even be flippant about honor today. Honor doesn't hold a role. It's funny because I feel like we still kind of have some of these honor relationships in our lives today. We'll say things like, a man's only as good as his word and stuff like that. Well, that's honor-based. But at the same time, we're like, oh, I wouldn't die for honor. Well, it's like, well, then how far does honor go in our lives? What good is honor? Because honor, and the reason I bring all this up is because submission and honor should never be detached. Certainly not in the relationship that we're about to read in, and certainly not in our relationship to Christ. When we make ourselves a subject of Christ, when we put ourselves under the authority of God, we honor Him. That becomes our new relationship. If I say, I want to be under your authority, O God Most High, then I am beginning to choose to do things that honor Him. And that's how we ought to be in all of our relationships. And we're going to get to something real cool here And I'm going to get to the words so that you guys understand how all of this flows. But I wanted to front load it with this so that as we get into the story, you can kind of see how all of these things are mixing together and why I think this story is so wonderful. So it says, now Samuel died. And all of Israel assembled and mourned him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. And then David moved down into the desert of Paran. And a certain man in Moab, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. And his name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And she was an intelligent and beautiful woman, and her husband was surly and mean in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. Now, I've brought this up before. When the Bible feels the need to point out a detail, that is something we need to pay attention to. Why did the Bible tell us about, number one, a man's wife, and number two, that his wife was intelligent and beautiful? This is going to lead into something later in the story. Right? It's important for us to understand this. It's also important for us to understand the characters that are involved in this story, including David, who we're going to read about shortly. But we have this man, Nabal, who is surly and mean. And surly's not a word that we use today. You know, you certainly wouldn't walk up. Well, maybe the newfies in the crowd would use that word. You're the only ones left that use that word. But you know what I mean? It's not a common word we use any day, but we can. When I read that he was a mean man, you guys would be like, oh, okay, I kind of get what's going on here. He's not a pleasant person to be around. And it says in his dealings with other people, right? So he's become very wealthy, probably did it in an underhanded way because he's not a very nice person. He's very mean. And it tells us he's a Calebite because it's trying to tell us what family he's from, and that he's actually from a very good family. If you remember who Caleb was, Caleb and Joshua were two of the spies, 2 of the 12 that went into the land. And it was only Caleb and Joshua that said, hey, let's go in, God is with us, and everyone else stopped. And so instead, everyone else had to die, right? They wandered for 40 years, everyone else died. Only Joshua and Caleb were allowed to enter into the promised land. That was it from that generation. And so using Calebite as, or telling us he's a Calebite is telling us the lineage he's from. He's from a good family, but he's become a bad man. It says, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men, and he said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time, and when your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them the whole time that they were at Carmel. Nothing of theirs was missing. Ask of your servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable towards my men, since we come at festive time, and please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. And when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited, and Nabal answered the servants, saying, who is this David? Now, do any of you believe that for a second? David is a household name. Saul kills his thousands. David kills his tens of thousands. Remember, this is the song that's being sung. He is one of the most well-known people in the whole land, and this guy has the gall to say, who's David? I don't know. What do I owe him? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shears and give it to the men coming from who knows where? Now, on the surface, okay, let's take it at surface value. Let's say for a moment he didn't actually know who David was. Okay. Why is this a big deal? If you don't know, at festive time, and we actually talked about this, if you were with us when we were talking about the Levite and the concubine back in the book of Judges, the whole thing about him going to the town square was that if you were Hebrew and you went to the town square, right, they would see one of their Hebrew brothers that was out there, one of the sons of Abraham was out there, and they were not allowed to leave them out in the cold. You had to welcome them into your home and break bread with them. This was, not only was it custom, it was under the law. You were meant to take care of each other. And so Nabal is just straight up, and here's the thing, it didn't matter your level of wealth or prosperity, but Nabal is extremely wealthy and extremely prosperous. 3,000 may not sound a lot to you, but in a world of significantly fewer people, that is like having a mega farm today. This guy has a massive farm with tons of animals, 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. This is a lot. He is an extremely wealthy individual. But he's surly and he's mean. And so he refuses to welcome in David and his men, and instead decides to dishonor him in the way that he speaks to him, and in the way that he treats him. Now, David, being, of course, a very rational and level-headed man, says his men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. And David, of course, is rational and level-headed, so he said to each of his men, "Strap on your swords!" So they did. And David strapped on his own as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants, he's mad. And I also want to point out, remember, in almost every other instance before this, this is how you know David's mad, okay? David, when he was being hunted, when he was fighting the Philistines, all these other times, he went before God and said, "God, what should I do?" And God was very clear with him. We don't read that this time. Because when we get angry, don't we act irrationally and do silly and stupid things? And if you're not nodding, well, good for you. Maybe you don't get that angry. But the rest of us are human beings, and we get angry and we do stupid things. We act irrationally and we act wrong. And that's exactly what David's doing here. And it says, one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, so this is one of the servants of Abigail, she's telling, the servant comes to Abigail and says, "David, messengers from the wilderness came from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, and he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us." Right? So this seems to be one of the guys that was out in the wilderness. "They did not mistreat us the whole time they were out there in the fields near them. Nothing was missing. Night and day they were out there, and they were a wall around us for the whole time that we were herding our sheep near them." Right? So they weren't just not stealing. They were actually actively protecting them from the dangers of the wilderness, right? David and his men, they didn't owe them anything. They didn't need to do it, but they were out there doing it because they felt like, these are our brothers, and we're going to protect our brothers while we're out here. Right? David wanted to honor them. Now and he wanted to honor Nabal, right? He wanted to honor this one of his brothers. It says, "Now think this over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and this whole household. He is such a wicked man, Nabal, and no one can talk to him." Now this is why I love this story. I started the story by talking about submission. And a lot of times when we talk about submission, we like to tie in the word obey. But this is why I said we should not detach honor from submission, because I don't think it's about obey. What does the 10 Commandments tell us about our parents? We sing the song, "Obey our mom and dad, O-B-E-Y, obey them or they'll be sad." Anyway, but it doesn't say obey. It says honor. Honor your mother and your father. Wives, does it say, "Wives, obey your husband"? No, it says, "Wives, honor your husband." And what does she do here? And this is why I love this story so much. Because she doesn't obey. If she was to obey, she would complete the dishonor of Nabal here. But instead, what does she do? She acts quickly. She recognizes the dishonor that is being heaped on her husband's head, and instead, she takes 200 loaves of bread. Man, this is come on. You got this is stuff he has around the house, right? He can act quickly, and yet he refused to help. This is just stuff around the house. 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep. Man, that's a lot of meat. 5 shears of roasted grain. That's a lot of grain. 100 cakes of raisins, 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them onto donkeys. And then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow. But she didn't tell her husband Nabal. Why? Because, and I think it's obvious, we know why she didn't. He had already been completely content with the dishonor he heaped upon himself, and she wasn't willing to allow him to heap it on herself again, or heap it on himself again. This is why I think this is so important. She chose, instead of obedience, to honor. And here's my disclaimer I'll put out here. If you're looking for an excuse to disobey, you're probably already in the territory of dishonor. Okay? Don't be looking for the excuse to disobey. But sometimes it does come up, and we realize that our commitment to God, our commitment to honoring our commitments, sometimes means that we're going to have to do something against the will of someone else. In this case, against the will of her husband, because her husband has a wicked and evil way about him. And instead, she says no, for his honor, for his grace, for his mercy, and for the mercy of all of the people in my house. I'm going to do the right thing. She chooses to do the right thing, the honorable thing, rather than strict obedience. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, it's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property. Right, so he's fuming. Can you imagine? So this is David, he's marching, he's angry. He's fuming. And I don't know if ladies get like this, I really don't. But I know almost every guy in here can relate to exactly what David's going through. You're fuming, you're mad, you're like, and you're just amping yourself up, and you're just ready. I'm gonna pound him. I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna kill all his sons. Okay, maybe I've never gone that far, but I can understand but he's mad. It's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his went missing. And what he paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. See, he's mad. I'm going to kill everyone in his house. Chill out, David. But this is one of the things, by the way, that I love about the Bible, is that if the Bible were truly only concerned about the good and not the bad, it would hide this, but it doesn't. Because it shows us, guess what? Humans are fallible, especially when we act without God. What is David doing here? He's not acting with God. He's just powered by rage, and he's storming in. But when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey, bowed before David with her face to the ground. Remember who she is. This is no servant. She is the wife to a very, very wealthy man. People bow to her, not the other way around. What is she doing? She's trying to correct the dishonor that has been done because she's acting in an honorable way to those that have been wronged. She's saying, you know what? You have been wronged, and I need to mend this. I need to humble myself, put myself under your authority, David, under your mercy, under your grace, David. She fell at his feet. Again, she's a powerful woman. And she said, pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man, Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent, and now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, and since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles." Right? They know who he is. This is not Nabal being a real jerk. "Oh, I don't know who David is." Yeah, you're a liar. You're acting evil. They know he fights the Lord's battles. No wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away from you as the pocket of a sling. And when the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he has promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have his conscience and staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. I'm not sure if you heard that part in verse 30, but they know he is going to be the next king. Right? It's no longer a secret. It's no longer just something that Samuel did in the secret of the night. The nation knows David is going to be king. That David is next in line. That David, whenever Saul dies, whenever God decides to deal with Saul, the throne will go to him. And she's saying, "We know who you are. We submit ourselves to you, O king." And I love what she said there. She said, "My Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having to avenge himself." What is she saying there? You've probably heard this before. Vengeance isn't ours. It's the Lord's. Here's the thing, friends, and I can agree with you on this. Have you ever had that moment where you see some sort of grave injustice and your heart, it aches? And you feel animated. I don't know about you, but man, when I see something bad, I don't know, maybe it's the fight or flight response kicking in, and the fight kicks in, and you're like, I want to make it right. I want to change it. Justice needs to be served. We need to make this right. And guess what? Justice is God's, and all justice will be served. But it's not for us to go out and seek for ourselves. It's not. And Abigail is reminding David of that in this moment. And I like how she does it, right? You think she didn't know when she saw 400 men marching ready for war coming her way? You think she didn't know what they were about to do? And yet she says, "Oh, we've come before you to do this thing. Isn't it great that you haven't done this thing?" She knows what he was about to do. By the way, this is called giving somebody an out. You should do it in every conversation. Don't just feel like you need to trap people. It's a bad idea. You make people upset. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day." Right? He acknowledges it. You know what? Yes, Abigail, it was you. I was ready to go kill your husband. Not only your husband, but his shepherds, his sons, his grandsons, all of his male servants. I was ready to kill every last one of them. But you stopped me. Why? Because of your goodness. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. So David accepted from her hand, what she had brought to him, and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." And when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like a king, because he's not poor. He easily could have hosted David and his men, but he chose not to. He was in high spirits and he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Now, justice isn't always that swift for us. But friends, the Lord will have his justice. we don't need to go out and pursue it on our own. That was one of the big failings of David in this chapter. And I love that it was a woman set out and content and wanting to fulfill her oath. When she said, I will honor even this dishonorable man, she had no look, did David want to kill the women? No. Did David want to kill the children? No. She was never in any danger. She would have been fine. But she chose to honor someone who would show dishonor. Why? Because she said, I will not do evil for evil. I will only do good. I will serve the Lord. I will live up to my end. I will do exactly what I've claimed to say. I will be the honorable one. And I wonder today, is that a word that we're going to let into our heart? Honor. Too often, even in the church today, we make it about obedience. Are you doing the right things? Are you obeying the word of God instead of are you honoring the Lord? Is the way you do things, are the things that you do, think, act, say, are the things that you do, is this a thing that would honor God? Or are all you interested in is the strict obedience to every last little rule? Because in that case, you might as well just become Jewish. To be a Christian is to recognize that Jesus Christ came and died on the cross for our sins. That he freely gives away the gift of everlasting life. And what do we give in return? We honor the Lord our God. We honor him by honoring our relationships, by being good to one another, by honoring our wives and our husbands. But I feel like this word, it's been lost. We no longer hold honor up above, up as high as it once used to be. And I was thinking about this morning. The Beatles got it wrong. I don't care what you think about the song, but love is not all you need. It's a part of it. And anyone that's been married knows that. Love's not enough. You need to have honor and respect and courage and strength. Are we willing to allow that into our lives? And so how does it resolve for her? So now poor Abigail's a widow. It says when David heard Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong." He kept David from doing wrong and brought Nabal's wrongdoing down onto his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. And his servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent to us to take you to become his wife." So she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." So Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were both his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, remember his original wife, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Now, that's a whole other conversation when we get into David and his wives. There's a lot of problems there too. And again, this is why I love the story of the Bible. David was a great man. Did he have some flaws? Yeah. He couldn't stop marrying women, for one. So none of them got the honor and respect that they deserved. But I love this story because it showed us as Christians today, because I feel like as Jesus so poignantly revealed to us, it's easy to love those who love you. It's really, really hard to love those who hate you. It's really, really difficult to show honor to those who would continually dishonor you. Right? David went out and he showed nothing but respect and courage, and he treated Nabal so well, only to be treated evilly in return. And friends, that happens to us, and then we feel just like David. We want to get even. We want to settle the score. We want to make it right. But guess what? Thankfully, for most men, if once you get married, hopefully you have a good wife, just like Abigail, who goes, hey, maybe you need to chill out for a moment. I think there's a lot of truth to behind every great man is a good woman. Because we work together. We honor each other. And it's a lot easier to be good Christians, to live the way that God has set up in front of us, to live out the way that God has revealed to us right here in His Word, to honor one another if we have people that we hold to that same relationship or that same standard in our own lives. So how are you going to live today? Is it going to be about obeying, oppression, being autocratic? Or is it going to be about honor and grace, compassion? But again, honor above all else.